let you guys know how important you are. Dr. Scott was bragging about this young man all last week, but someone's destiny is tied to your assignment. And you have to make sure that you are aware of that every single day, that you are changing someone's life for the better. And that was just evidence of that. Dr. Hawkins will come up and finish out her presentation. I was just told that we have a special guest from Title IV coming. So if you have any Title IV related questions, please raise your hand and we'll try to address those. And then we'll have a great panel join me on the stage. So Dr. Hawkins, come finish us out.
Thank you, Brittany. Okay, I only have about 10 more minutes left, so we will go through this part fairly quickly because it's kind of redundant, but necessary. Okay, so here we have another example of our budget narrative, and this one in particular is salary related, which is very similar to the previous one, so I won't go through that, but you can see the key at the bottom and the difference between one that would be approved and one and a budget narrative that would not be approved. Okay, so that's the same, school improvement. And here's one for our purchase service 300. Oh, the one that's not approved. Funds will be used for instructional purchase services. And we used to see a lot of this, but not so much now. So they are more so looking like our right-hand side. And you can see the difference in the two. In here, you may not know the particular company that you are contracting with, but you do know it will be a purchase service. So the example is sufficient. A third-party company will be used to provide substitute teachers at Title I schools, yada, yada, yada. But the narrative gives us enough information to determine if this purchase is reasonable, necessary, and allocable to the grant. Any questions? Okay, so this is one for another salary, but of course you can see the difference in the FTE versus the number of personnel. Who could quickly give us, what's the difference between the personnel and FTE? Absolutely. FTE is the percentage, the time that that person will be working toward the grant, and the actual personnel is the number of people, okay? Do they have to be equal? No, they do not have to be equal, okay? Because a person could be paid, could be a full-time person, which is one person, but partially out of Title I, so only half of their salary, or 0.5 of their salary, will be coming out of Title I. And we only need to know what's applicable to that portion of the grant. So at that point, we don't need to know where the other half is coming from. All right, another example of a purchase service. Give you a few seconds to read through that one. Any questions? We see the description, we see the services that are being provided, and the dollar amount that is being utilized. I see some puzzled faces, so I'll pause. Okay. Next, we have materials and supplies, which is different, so I will go over this one. Here, we need to know the description, what is being purchased, and the amount budgeted. The budget part that would not be approved, supplemental supplies and materials for the Summer Bridge program, does that give us enough information to determine what's being purchased? And if it's reasonable, necessary, allocable to the grant. No, it does not. So let's look at the second narrative. Supplemental materials and supplies for ABC High School and XYZ Middle School. Students and supplies includes display boards, ACT workbooks, office supplies, paper, staplers, yada, 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 and study guide. Okay, office equipment would suffice for paper, pencils, or and general supplies would suffice. But when we're purchasing stuff outside of general supplies, we need to know what we're actually purchasing here. Now, is this a district set aside or is this PPA? How do we know it's PPA? School names have been identified for us. Okay? Next example, not a purchase order, excuse me, materials and supplies. A little bit more information. Any questions? There's a description there for the right-hand side. Give us a list of the items being purchased and the amounts that's being budgeted. Is it all covered and sufficient? Yes, meets all the necessary components. All right, so now we're going to move into carryover funds. In particular, we want to talk about budgeting those carryover funds in the narrative and how we identify those carryover funds. But before we do that, keep in mind that ideally, if you should add carryover funds to line items or expenditures that's already been outlined in your grant. Should not necessarily be new expenditures because we want to plan for that particular year and use the carryover funds to budget or to add to, as opposed to adding new expenditures. But there are some cases where it happens and we work with you when it happens, but the ideal goal is to have those budgeted items already outlined in your application. So, carryover funds, there are 3 options when it comes to budgeting carryover funds. Your first option, the allocation could go towards your district set-aside. The second option, the allocation can go towards your PPA. And the third option is what? A combination of both. All right, so here is what the set-aside page looks like, okay? Now, a big no-no where you see the red line drawn across the screen is we do not add carryover below the red line, okay? Because we don't mix old money with new money, okay? So that doesn't mean you cannot budget carryover for set-aside. You just do not add it on the set-aside page, okay? All funds or all carryover that's going strictly toward PPA, you will add it where you see the first and second arrow above the red line. If you are budgeting all of your set-asides toward PPA, then you just enter the total amount where the blue line above the red line is, okay? Second, if you are adding your carryover to set-asides, although you're not budgeting below the red line, you're not changing anything, you're just going to update your budget narrative, and you will put a comment in the history log outlining where those items will be budgeted on the budget narrative as it relates to the set-aside page, okay? Any questions there? Okay, so I just went through that. That's your PPA. Here, what's wrong with this particular page? This is your PPA page, and what's at the bottom? What shouldn't be there? Remaining balance. Should we have a remaining balance? Can we have a remaining balance? That's less than what? $5. 10 cents is great for us, but we do not want to exceed $5. Okay, anything that exceeds $5, we will have to send it back to be rebudgeted. Okay, so here we have 79 cents remaining. Would that be approved? Yes, that's fine. Okay, so let's talk about our incoming carryover $88,000. On the set-asides page, if you see here in the blue box, we have it labeled clear for us so we're able to find that information or find that amount in the budget narrative. So you want to have kind of a header, if you will, that leads that budget narrative to let us know that this is carryover set aside for other district initiatives, and we are adding the narrative to match whatever it is that we're budgeting, or updating the narrative that's there But what's important is that portion that's specific to our carryover set aside, it has that header there to let us know, because in order for us to balance the budget, we're not just looking at the actual budget, we're actually looking at the numbers within the narrative description to balance the budget. So we want to easily identify what's carryover, what's not carryover, and then what carryover is applicable to what part of the set asides. So we're able to account for every single cent that's budgeted. Okay? And that part, it gets really, it's easy said in isolation, but as you're working in your budget, I know sometimes you have your rhythm and you kind of forget, but it's really hard. Even if it's identified as carryover, it's kind of hard to know specifically where you want those funds budgeted if they're not clearly labeled. All right, lastly, we have our related documents, and I think we've gotten over this hurdle of some documents are required for some LEAs, depending on, your population and who's been served, and some documents that are not required are on the documents that are required are on the non-required list. That's because they are not required for every LEA. But if they are required for you and you know that, make sure you upload them in where they're supposed to be uploaded, or we would have to send the document, the application back. And that's something we don't want to have to send the application back for. Of course, because the goal is to do what? Get it approved the first time, like many of you are going to do. All right, just some quick reminders regarding our validation messages. You did receive some of you received some messages last year that we had to update. So don't get alarmed if you receive something, because we changed some business rules slightly. I think we worked out all of those kinks and those business rules that I think it was related to carryover and the 15% or what have you. But sometimes we do update those business rules, and maybe we need to allow for a little bit more flexibility. So if you get an alert and you're really concerned about it, just let us know so we can look into that particular warning. But I think we've kind of got all those ironed out. Jason, don't you think? Okay. We're making some more adjustments to eGAP in the future for the betterment of the actual platform, but as we make those updates, you will know more. So the way it is right now is the way it's going to be for the start of this application period. So everything should be pretty consistent from last year. All right, so here are some things to double check. Make sure all your funds have been entered into the budget narrative. Make sure you have a plan where you're meeting with your LEA account, not your LEA account, excuse me, your CSFO regarding what's in your CSFO's budget to make sure it reflects in your eGAP, and of course, that's reflecting in your school's ASIP. A good guide for you all to follow as well is the checklist. How many of you follow the checklist? There's a checklist in eGAP, and there's also a checklist uploaded in our document library that you can use. That's actually what we use to go through the application. And it's pretty lengthy, I know. But it's definitely a great guide or resource to use once you finish your application. If you kind of want to double check, then it's a great tool to have. All right, any other questions? If not, that concludes my presentation, and thank you all so much.
All right.